I was born December 21st, 1996. I was born to a blonde-haired, blue-eyed mother from Long Island, New York, and a dark-skinned father who had immigrated from India 15 years earlier. I was born Malini Natalie. Malini, coming from Sanskrit origins, meaning nurturer, and Natalie, the French spelling, meaning Christmas Day. I grew up dancing on our fireplace mantle to the Annie soundtrack and Bollywood music in equal parts. I was born into what my father called a lily-white town. In this town, I was white enough to be accepted by the white students, but brown enough to not be considered beautiful. Here, I learned to hate my hair because it was not blonde and straight like the other girls, but love my complexion because I was told it made me exotic. It was here I was told I wasn't really Indian because of how I acted. But my brother was told to go back to his country when walking home from school one day. It was in this town that dinners alternated between chicken curry and meatloaf. I was born into a family where I called my mother's mother grandma and my father's mother dadiji, which is the Hindi term for parental grandmother. When I wasn't baptized as a baby, grandma cried hysterically. And every Christmas hence, I was given a Bible because she was so afraid that my soul would end up in purgatory. Meanwhile, with Adiji, she would light incense, and I would sit next to her as she prayed to Shiva, Vishnu, and countless other Hindi gods. She used to put a black dot on my face so that the evil eye wouldn't see into my soul, because then I was less than perfect. At the time, I didn't understand how one of my grandmothers could believe in one God while the other believed in many. But I was pretty sure my soul was in mortal peril. At 14, I moved to Manhattan and enrolled in a private school. On the first day, a girl sat down next to me, looked me dead in the eye, and asked, "So, what are you?" This school was about 85% white students and 15% students of color. The majority of the white students paid full tuition, and the majority of the students of color were on scholarship. Here, I was too brown for the white students because I didn't share their primarily Jewish heritage or their upbringing as one of Manhattan's elite. But I was also too white for the students of color because I did come from an affluent family and I hadn't shared a lot of the same trials and rampant discrimination that they had. It was also in high school that I was first made aware of the immense racism in America. This happened through the murders of Trayvon Martin, Eric Garner, Sandra Bland, and countless other men and women of color who were wrongfully killed at the hands of those who were supposed to protect them. During this time, many of my classmates, both those who identified as white and as a student of color, participated in the protests that were occurring in Manhattan and the other 4 boroughs of New York City. However, I stayed back. I wasn't sure where I stood on this issue. Was I an ally, or was I part of the oppressed group? Was I white because of my mother and my upbringing? Or was I a person of color because of my father and the discrimination I had encountered as an ethnically ambiguous brown woman in the 21st century? It wasn't until college that I realized I am both. I am white and privileged when I go urban exploring with friends and am caught by the cops, but the only repercussion is that we are told to go home. But I am brown and oppressed when I am flagged going through airport security more often than I am not, but still have to plaster a smile on my face to let the officers know I am of no threat to them. And no, I promise those textbooks are not bombs. That actually even happened, which is sad. And for the longest time, I thought I was the only one who dealt with this issue, because for the longest time, I was the only one I knew who did. This past summer, I served as part of my college's orientation team. Before orientation begins, the team participates in many different activities that have us discuss and confront our own identifiers. It was during one of these activities that I talked to two other young women who had one parent who was white and one of color. They too had faced a lot of the same things I had growing up. They often felt torn between the two cultures encapsulated in their families and confused by the varying beliefs that were in their households. This realization shocked and saddened me. Why had we all felt so alone before? Why had it taken nearly 2 decades for us to find other people who shared our experience? Why had no one talked about this when we were growing up? It was then that I realized that race is one of the few binaries we have left in terms of identifiers. In many of our other identifiers, we allow there to be a spectrum. You can be gay or straight or somewhere in between. You no longer have to prescribe to simply being male or female. And I by no means to say that being in the middle of these spectrums is easy at all. They're often some of the hardest identifiers to carry. But there is solace to be found when society at large acknowledges part of your identity. And it makes sense we see race this way. Throughout the majority of human history, we've pitted one racial group against another, which has made people in each group have to identify more strongly with those around them. However, we live in an age where more and more people who are mixed race are being born. So how does it make sense to only have 2 categories in which someone can belong? Something someone of mixed race is all too familiar with is the assumption. Throughout my life, I have been assumed to be Hawaiian, Polynesian, Latina, and Italian, among various other racial and ethnic identifiers. This is more than just being problematic because someone is assuming part of my identity. This is problematic because each one of those racial identifiers carries a different weight in our society. This assumption leads to the silencing of mixed race people because we don't know how you perceive us. If you think I'm white, how will you respond if I start discussing my instances of discrimination? If you think I'm a person of color, how will you respond when I start condemning the actions of white people, some of whom are my relatives? I think this phenomenon does a great disservice to us all. We are at a time of immense racial tension, and many racial discussions become an us versus them scenario. White people versus people of color. These conversations are often polarizing and leaves people feeling hurt. I believe that by including the mixed voice, the voice that has experienced both what it means to be a person of color and to be white, all will come away with a greater understanding of racial issues. And I by no means say that this will solve all racial issues or that racial radicals will fully get behind this. But it's an important first step in coming to terms with the different races in our society. And we all have a role to play in this change. My role, and the role of many others of mixed race, is to speak despite the assumption. We stay silent because we are afraid of something that may or may not happen. And if this does happen, it provides a space for an important dialogue that illuminates racial assumption. And the role of those who are not of mixed race is to try not to assume. This isn't easy. We're hardwired to assume because it allows our brain to make quicker decisions. And this was super useful when we used to only eat twigs and berries and a noise in the middle of the night might be a tiger. But we're not there anymore. And it's important that we try to fight against this nature of ours in order to have a more understanding society. Neither of these roles are easy. They are characteristically difficult. But growth does not happen in our comfort zone. And based on the cultural and political status of America, it's very evident that we are in some need of growth. I'm still learning what it means to be a woman of mixed race in the 21st century, but I know a few things. I know that 99% of the time, when someone meets me, they'll call me Malini. I know that for the rest of my life, exotic will be seen as a compliment, primarily. And I know that a lot of what I thought were ors as my identifiers are ands. I like chicken curry and I like meatloaf. I like American clothes and I love my sari. I am white and a person of color. And I'm telling you all my story today in the hopes that maybe I've made someone else feel a little less alone in their experience, and maybe I've helped someone see that they have a role to play in creating a more understanding society. Thank you.